A cozy high-end restaurant on a Saturday night turns into the stage for quiet tension. A young black couple, dressed impeccably, are denied service by a smug waiter in front of whispering patrons. The air grows heavy with unspoken judgment until a single calm but cutting response from the husband flips the emotional balance, leaving the waiter rattled and the audience unsure of what's about to unfold. "We don't serve your kind here." The words came like a slap across the table, low enough to avoid echoing to every corner of the dimly lit restaurant, yet loud enough for the nearby diners to pause mid-bite. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The clink of cutlery faded into an uneasy stillness. The setting was elegant crimson velvet booths, gold-rimmed plates, chandeliers scattering soft light across polished tables. It was the kind of place where the air itself seemed perfumed with wealth and restraint. Every head that turned did so with feigned subtlety, like they weren't dying to see what would happen next. At the center of it all sat a young couple. Elijah wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, the kind that looked like it had been pressed just for this evening. Across from him, his wife Naomi wore a silk emerald dress that shimmered under the lights, her hair pinned up like she was born for rooms like this. The waiter stood between them and the world. Early 30s, slick back blonde hair, posture stiff as if he'd been rehearsing superiority in the mirror. His bow tie sat too tight, his jaw tighter. There was no hesitation in his tone, just the quiet certainty of someone who thought. The rules bent around his comfort. Naomi blinked slowly, her fingers tightening on the menu. Elijah's eyes stayed locked on the man before them, unblinking, unshaken. From the corner booth, a woman in pearls leaned toward her husband and whispered, "I knew this would happen eventually." Her husband gave a small, knowing nod, as if racism here was as natural as the wine list. The waiter took one step closer, his hand brushing the notepad in his apron pocket but making no move to write anything down. "If you'll kindly," he began, his tone mocking the word. Elijah leaned back in his chair, a quiet exhale passing through his nose. He wasn't angry, not visibly. He just observed, as if he was making a note in his head that would matter later. A champagne flute somewhere in the background tilted, liquid rippling under a woman's trembling hand. "You think I came here for your service?" Elijah's voice was soft, almost polite. It made the waiter blink. "No," he continued, folding his hands over the table. "I came here to see who would embarrass themselves first." A couple at the next table stifled a laugh, though whether it was at the remark or the audacity, no one could tell. Naomi placed her menu down, her expression unreadable, her voice quieter still. "You should go get your manager. Tell him Elijah Carter is here." Something about the way she said his name made the waiter falter. A faint furrow appeared between his brows. But arrogance is stubborn. He straightened up, offering a thin smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And why?" he asked. "Would the manager care about that?" Elijah didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the inside pocket of his suit and set something on the table, a small, leather-bound card holder embossed with gold initials. His hand lingered over it, just long enough for the waiter to notice, then withdrew. A beat of silence. The waiter took a breath like he was about to say something dismissive again. But before the words formed, a deep voice from behind cut through. The tension. What's going on here? The entire room seemed to inhale at once. A tall, broad man in a chef's jacket stood near the entrance to the dining room, a clean white apron tied neatly at his waist. His presence alone felt heavier than the air in the room. The waiter stiffened. "Just seating issue, sir." The man's gaze dropped to Elijah, then Naomi, then to the untouched table settings. His jaw tightened. "Elijah Carter?" the man said, his tone shifting. Elijah leaned forward, the faintest hint of a smile on his lips. "Evening, Marco." The name seemed to ripple through the space like a stone dropped in still water. A few diners whispered, others straightened in their chairs as if they suddenly realized they were in the middle of something important. The waiter's smirk was gone now, replaced by confusion, and that's when Marco, the owner of the restaurant, stepped forward, his eyes fixed not on Elijah, but on the man still standing between him and the table. "Follow me," he said to the waiter, his voice low but sharp. No one moved for a second, then the owner's tone hardened. "Now." The clink of the waiter's polished shoes against the marble floor followed Marco toward the back, leaving Elijah and Naomi at their table, the room around them buzzing with curiosity. Naomi lifted her glass of water, her expression cool. "That didn't take long." Elijah leaned back again, eyes still on the doorway where the two men had disappeared. "No," he said, his voice calm. "It's only just begun. The chandeliers shimmered overhead, but the warmth in the room had shifted entirely. Somewhere in the kitchen, a door slammed shut, and in that instant, everyone in the restaurant knew this was no ordinary dinner. The dining room was never truly quiet, not in a place like this, but now the sound wasn't of casual conversation. It was the low, urgent hum of curiosity. From one table, a man whispered, "I've heard that name before." "Carter." "Where have I?" Another, leaning in close to her companion, muttered, "Banker? Politician? He has that look." Naomi heard them all without glancing their way. She sat with the composure of someone who knew exactly how to carry a room without touching it. Her hands rested lightly on the table, her posture perfect. Only the faintest lift at the corner of her lips betrayed amusement at the scene playing out around her. Elijah, on the other hand, scanned the room in measured glances. Not in paranoia, more like a man taking inventory. He saw the pearl necklace, woman who had whispered earlier, now keeping her gaze fixed on him. He noticed the couple near the window who kept pretending to browse the wine menu, though their eyes betrayed their focus. The restaurant had shifted from a Saturday night dinner crowd to an audience at an unfolding play. A soft voice interrupted. "Excuse me, sir?" A young busboy stood at the edge of their table, his hands nervously gripping a pitcher of water. He looked no older than 20, with sleeves slightly too long for his uniform shirt. His eyes darted toward the kitchen door. "I'm sorry," the busboy whispered, leaning slightly forward. "About what he said." "That's not." Elijah raised a hand gently. "You have nothing to apologize for." The busboy swallowed, nodding quickly, and topped off their glasses before retreating, almost tripping over his own feet as he went. Naomi tilted her head toward her husband. "You're making them nervous," she murmured. "Good," Elijah replied simply. Meanwhile, behind the kitchen doors, the air was different. The hum of diners was replaced by the hiss of pans, the clang of metal on metal, the sharp scent of rosemary and seared meat. But in the small office just past the prep line, the temperature was rising for a different reason. Marco, the owner, stood with arms crossed, towering over the waiter. "You have any idea what you just did?" Marco's voice was low, but the steel in it was unmistakable. The waiter, still stiff in posture, didn't flinch. "I was protecting the atmosphere of your restaurant." Marco's eyes narrowed. "By insulting one of my most important guests?" The waiter frowned, confusion tightening his features. "Important guest? Sir, with all due respect, you don't know because you don't listen." Marco cut him off sharply. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over the smaller man. "Elijah Carter isn't just another customer." He stopped himself, as if the words were too big to hand over to someone undeserving. The waiter took a step back, sensing the weight of what was being withheld. "Who is he?" Marco didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for the phone on his desk, dialing a number with practiced precision. "Antonio," he said into the receiver, his tone shifting into something more formal. "Yes, he's here. Came in tonight with his wife." "Yes, I know what it means." The waiter's brow furrowed deeper. "What does it mean?" he asked again when Marco hung up. Marco finally turned toward him, eyes sharp. "It means you may have just put your job and a lot more on the line." Back in the dining room, Naomi took a slow sip of water, her gaze locked on her husband. "You're awfully quiet," she said softly. Elijah's eyes remained on the kitchen doors. "Quiet doesn't mean still," he replied. At that moment, a hostess approached with hesitant steps. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice uncertain. "The owner will be right out. In the meantime, may I bring you something to start?" "On the house." Naomi glanced up at her, her voice gracious but cool. "Thank you. We'll wait." The hostess nodded, retreating quickly. The room had grown heavier with anticipation. Every time the kitchen doors swung open, more eyes flicked toward them, waiting for Marco to return. Elijah finally leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know what I've learned, Naomi?" She arched a brow. "What's that?" "When people show you who they are." He let the pause stretch, the corners of his mouth curving just slightly. "You make sure everyone sees it." And just as he finished, the kitchen doors opened. Marco stepped out, his eyes scanning the room before landing squarely on Elijah. He crossed the floor with purpose, the murmur of whispers following him like a shadow. The waiter trailed behind him, looking smaller now, though his jaw was still set. Marco reached the table, stopping directly in front of Elijah and Naomi. The silence in the room was almost perfect. "Elijah," Marco said, his voice steady but warmer than it had been moments ago in the office. "We need to talk." Elijah's eyes met his. "Yes," he said. "We do." Marco looked around, then inclined his head toward a more private space. But Elijah didn't move. "Here is fine," Elijah said simply. The choice of words, the firmness behind them, made Marco pause. Every diner in the room was leaning just slightly forward now, straining to hear. Marco nodded slowly, realizing that whatever conversation was about to happen, it wasn't going to be hidden behind closed doors. Every candle flame seemed sharper now, each glass of wine trembling slightly in its stem as the room collectively held its breath. Marco clasped his hands in front of him, an attempt at formality that didn't quite mask his discomfort. He was used to controlling a room, but Elijah had shifted the balance without even standing. "Elijah," Marco began, his voice smooth, "I want to personally apologize for the treatment you and your wife received. It is unacceptable," and Elijah held up a hand, not abruptly, but with quiet command. "Marco, you've known me long enough to know I'm not here for an apology." The words landed with weight. Naomi's eyes flickered with a hint of satisfaction. From across the room, the pearl necklace woman whispered to her companion, "Long enough to know? They've met before?" Marco's lips pressed into a line. "Then tell me what you are here for." Elijah leaned forward slightly, his fingers interlaced on the table. "I'm here to see what your establishment stands for. Not in your mission statement, not on the wall in some framed plaque. Here, now, in front of the people you serve." A hush settled deeper. Even the clink of cutlery had stopped entirely. Marco glanced briefly at the waiter standing a few paces behind him. The man's earlier arrogance had thinned. His shoulders were tighter now, and a bead of sweat had begun tracing its way down his temple. "Elijah," Marco said carefully, "this is a good man who made a bad judgment." "A bad judgment?" Elijah repeated, his tone even but sharp. "He looked my wife in the eyes and decided her presence diminished your restaurant. That's not a bad judgment, Marco, that's a worldview." Naomi's hand brushed lightly over Elijah's, grounding him. Marco's jaw tightened. "You know I don't condone this. I believe you," Elijah said without hesitation. "But what you believe in here," he tapped a finger gently against his temple, "isn't always what lives out there." He gestured toward the dining room, toward the waitstaff frozen at their stations, the diners pretending not to watch too closely. The waiter shifted his weight. "I didn't mean you meant every word," Elijah cut in, still calm. "That's why it matters." Marco's patience was thinning. Elijah could see it in the way his nostrils flared, the faint twitch in his cheek. "Then tell me what you want done," Marco said, voice lower now. "I want him to understand," Elijah said simply. "Not for my sake, for his." The waiter finally spoke, his voice sharp with defensiveness. "I was protecting the quality of the dining experience." "I thought you thought," Elijah interrupted again, "that the color of my skin could predict the quality of my character. That's all you thought." A ripple went through the room, a shift in posture, a shared glance, a subtle acknowledgement from those who knew exactly what he meant. Naomi broke her silence, her voice clear. "And you did it in public, so it should be addressed in public." Her words seemed to solidify something in Elijah's demeanor. He reached into his jacket again, but this time, instead of the small leather card holder, he withdrew a folded piece of heavy cream paper. He set it on the table and slid it toward Marco. Marco hesitated before picking it up. As he unfolded it, his eyes moved quickly over the lines, then stopped. His head lifted slowly toward Elijah. "Elijah," Marco's voice carried a note of genuine surprise now. The diners leaned in further, though none dared ask what was written there. Elijah gave a small nod. "You've always known me as a regular customer. You never asked what I do. Maybe you didn't need to. But tonight, Marco, I think you should tell this room exactly who I am." Marco's throat worked as he swallowed. His eyes scanned the paper again, as if to be sure. The waiter, caught between confusion and dread, finally blurted out, "Who are you?" Elijah's gaze turned to him, level and unwavering. "The man who signs the checks for your biggest supplier." The words hit harder than a raised voice ever could. Marco set the paper back down on the table with care. "Elijah Carter," he said, his voice carrying now to the farthest booth, "is the primary investor in the chain of farms that supply this restaurant. And half the restaurants you've probably eaten at in this city." A stunned murmur spread through the room. The waiter's face drained of color. "I didn't know. You didn't care to know," Naomi corrected gently. Elijah stood now slowly, the scrape of his chair legs echoing. "Marco, I'm giving you a choice. Not about him," he glanced briefly at the waiter, "but about your house. You decide tonight what it stands for, and you decide it in front of everyone watching." Marco's eyes darted around the room, then back to Elijah. The weight of the moment was heavy enough to bend the air. I decide, Marco said finally, that this place stands for respect, and that anyone who can't deliver it doesn't work here. The words landed like a gavel. The waiter opened his mouth, but no sound came. Marco didn't look at him again. Elijah, Marco said, may I prepare you the finest meal in the house? Elijah's lips curved faintly. We'll see, he said. Then he sat back down, leaving Marco to handle the silence that followed. The waiter stood frozen in place, his apron feeling heavier now, as if the very fabric carried the weight of every eye in the room. His jaw twitched. His hands, which had so confidently rested on his hips earlier, now hung awkwardly at his sides. The sound in the restaurant had changed. The hum of whispers was different, now less curious, more knowing. Diners didn't need to ask each other what had happened. They'd seen enough to understand the gist. At the far table, a man in a tailored grey suit leaned toward his wife. I've done business with Carter Farms, he murmured. If that's the same Elijah Carter, then. He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung between them like smoke. Marco turned to the waiter. Take a moment in the back, he said, not unkindly, but with no room for debate. The waiter hesitated. His pride told him to stay, but the heat of the room told him to move. Without a word, he walked toward the kitchen, each step echoing like a drumbeat of retreat. Behind the swinging doors, the noise was louder, but the energy was different, a storm of half-hidden glances and muttered exchanges. You hear what happened? One line cook asked, his hands still busy slicing scallions. Everyone heard. The dishwasher replied, stacking plates. That guy in the suit? Big deal. Real big. The waiter stood near the prep counter, running a hand through his hair. It's blown out of proportion, he muttered. A hostess, grabbing a tray of glasses, raised a brow. You told a guest you don't serve their kind. His chest tightened. I didn't mean, but you said it, she interrupted, and then walked away. The scent of garlic butter in the air didn't mask the bitterness in the room. Out in the dining area, Naomi lifted her fork to the small bread plate. Marco had sent out a quiet olive branch in the form of warm rosemary rolls and whipped butter. You didn't have to push him this far, she said softly. Elijah spread butter across his roll with deliberate slowness. I didn't push him. I just gave him enough room to step where he was already heading. Her eyes studied him for a moment. And Marco? He'll land on his feet, Elijah replied. This is as much for him as it is for us. Naomi's lips curved faintly. You're always playing the long game. Marco returned to the table a few minutes later, now without the waiter trailing him. We've begun preparing your meal, he said. I'll personally oversee it. Appreciated, Elijah said. Marco glanced around the room, then leaned in slightly. Elijah, I should have known something like this would happen sooner or later. Not with you specifically, but here, with someone. It's not about expecting it, Elijah said. It's about deciding what happens after it does. Marco nodded, straightening again. His gaze flicked toward a table near the bar, where two younger men were watching intently. You've given my customers more to talk about tonight than the menu. That's the point, Elijah replied. In the kitchen, the waiter sat on a small stool near the staff lockers, his head resting in his hands. He replayed the scene over and over, the sharp quiet of the dining room, the way Elijah had never once raised his voice, and how every word still cut deeper than any shout could. He thought about his bills, about the rent due in 2 weeks, about the fact that jobs like this didn't come easily. His throat tightened. From the hallway, the buzzboy's voice floated in. They're saying he owns half the farms in the state. The waiter's head lifted slightly. What, Mr. Carter? The buzzboy said, peeking around the corner. That's what they're saying. And if that's true, well, I wouldn't want to be the guy who made him mad. The waiter's stomach sank further. Back at the table, Naomi leaned closer to Elijah. You've set the stage. What's the second act? Elijah's eyes glinted. Wait for dessert. Naomi chuckled under her breath. You're impossible. But when she looked at him again, she saw something in his gaze, not malice, but a kind of purpose that made her realize tonight wasn't just about one waiter. This was about showing an entire room something they wouldn't forget. The pearl necklace woman finally found her voice again, speaking just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. It's about time someone stood up to that kind of thing. Her husband nodded gravely, though whether he meant Elijah or Marco, no one could be sure. The corner booth, the young men who had been watching exchanged glances. You think he'll shut the place down? One whispered. The other shook his head. No, but he just made sure it'll never be the same. In the kitchen, Marco's voice could be heard giving orders, not the usual barked commands, but precise, controlled. Instructions. Perfectly medium rare. Plate it with the rosemary sprigs. Make it look like we're serving the president. The staff worked with extra care, as if the meal itself were an offering not just to a guest, but to the moment unfolding in the dining room. The waiter remained in the back, staring at the floor, wondering if he'd already worked his last shift. A tea. The table, Naomi reached for her glass. You're awfully composed for someone who just embarrassed a man into hiding. Elijah sipped his water. It's not about embarrassing him. It's about making sure next time he thinks twice before speaking. And if there is a next time? Naomi asked. Elijah's expression didn't change. Then he'll have learned nothing. But I have a feeling he will. From somewhere in the kitchen, the sound of a bell rang, a signal that the first course was ready. Marco emerged carrying the plates himself, setting them down with the precision of a man who understood the weight of presentation. For you, he said simply. Elijah nodded once. Let's eat. And as the aroma rose from the plate, it wasn't just the food that filled the air, it was the unmistakable sense that the evening's true story was still being written. The stainless steel counters gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, the air thick with the scent of searing garlic and butter. The kitchen of Eli Caron was its own world, loud, fast, and sharp, where clanging pans were as common as cutting words. But tonight, something heavier than steam hung in the air. They're still out there, aren't they? Whispered Claire, one of the younger servers, leaning toward the pastry station. Her eyes flicked toward the dining room doors. The couple? Yes, muttered Joseph, the line cook, without looking up from slicing herbs. And Daniel's probably digging his own grave right now. Not everyone agreed. A buzzboy stacking plates nearby snorted. Nah, he's doing the right thing. People like that. He trailed off, catching the glare from the head chef. Shut your mouth, Chef Marceau growled, his heavy French accent slicing through the noise. You are not paid to judge customers. You are paid to work. Understand? The buzzboy mumbled an apology, but the damage was done. The room's division was clear. Two camps formed, one bristling with discomfort, the other hiding prejudice behind muttered justifications. Through the narrow circular window in the kitchen door, they caught flashes of the boss's figure, tall and commanding, leaning over the table where the couple sat. His voice couldn't be heard, but his stance radiated control. Daniel stood stiffly beside him, jaw clenched. Looks like the storm's moved indoors, Joseph murmured. The door swung open, and the boss, Mr. Lawrence, stepped inside. His gaze swept the room, icy but calm. Daniel, office, now. The waiter froze for a second, then set down the notepad in his hand and followed. The kitchen quieted instantly, everyone straining to listen. Inside the office, behind a frosted glass panel, shadows moved. The boss's voice rose and fell in sharp bursts. At one point, Daniel's silhouette stiffened, his hand twitching toward the door before settling back. Then came the moment that made everyone lean closer. Daniel's head dropped, shoulders slumped. Do you think the boss knows them? Claire whispered, eyes wide. Oh, he knows, Joseph replied, his knife pausing mid-chop. And if I'm right, we're all about to find out exactly who they are. From the office, Mr. Lawrence's voice came clearer now, deliberate and cutting. You have no idea who you refuse to serve. The whispers spread through the kitchen like spilled wine on white linen. By the time Daniel Ray emerged, pale and tight-lipped, the room was buzzing. And in every whisper, the power in the story shifted away from the waiter toward the couple still seated in the dining room. The question on every tongue was the same. Who were they? The dining room had grown quieter since the confrontation. The low hum of conversation was now an uneasy murmur, like everyone sensed they were sitting in the middle of something far bigger than a bad service. The couple sat with quiet dignity, their body language calm but unshakable. The man's suit was perfectly pressed, his watch gleaming under the warm chandeliers. The woman, elegant in a deep emerald dress, held her wine glass with the kind of poise that came from a lifetime of knowing her own worth. At their table, the boss, Mr. Laurent, returned from the kitchen with a subtle but noticeable shift in his demeanor. His shoulders were straighter, his voice gentler. I must apologize again, he said, bowing slightly. Your meal will be prepared immediately. And of course, on the house. The man gave a faint smile, but his eyes studied Mr. Laurent closely. That's generous. But generosity isn't the same as respect. Mr. Laurent swallowed, visibly choosing his words. I understand. And I assure you, the incident you experienced is not reflective of my establishment's values around Them guests pretended not to watch, but every clink of a fork or rustle of a napkin was just camouflage for the curiosity burning in the room. It was the woman who finally broke the tension. She set her glass down and said, in a voice that carried without needing to be loud, "Do you remember the charity gala last spring, Mr. Laurent?" The boss's eyes flickered in recognition. "Of course. At the governor's mansion." The man leaned back slightly. "We were the guests of honor that night." A ripple of surprise passed over Laurent's face and, by extension, through the nearest tables who overheard. The man continued, his voice steady, "I'm Dr. Anthony Rivers. My wife, Eliza, serves on the National Civil Rights Commission. We've spent the last decade investigating cases, just like the one we experienced here tonight." Several diners gasped quietly. A fork clattered to the floor. At a table in the corner, one of the city's local reporters was already scribbling notes. Laurent's face paled. I didn't realize that's the point," Dr. Rivers cut in gently. "You didn't know, but your waiter didn't care to know. And that's where the real problem lies." The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted again, but this time it wasn't just curiosity, it was respect. Some even looked ashamed for not speaking up earlier. In the kitchen, word traveled faster than the smell of fresh bread. By the time the entrée plates were being plated for the Rivers, half the staff understood exactly who was sitting in the dining room, and why this night was going to be remembered. By the time the Rivers entrées arrived, the restaurant was no longer the quiet, elegant space it had been an hour ago. Whispers had evolved into murmurs, and murmurs into not-so-subtle glances toward the corner table. The waiter Greg lingered by the service station, trying to look busy polishing silverware that didn't need polishing. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white as he gripped a cloth napkin. Every now and then, he glanced toward the Rivers table and then quickly looked away. He had no idea that, just beyond the restaurant's large bay windows, a different storm was brewing. A young woman in a leather jacket stood with her phone angled toward the dining room. She wasn't filming the food. She was live streaming the story. "Y'all, you won't believe what I just saw. This waiter refused to serve a couple because they were black. The boss had to step in. And now, the guy's still walking around like nothing happened." Her voice carried urgency. Comments exploded on her screen. "Name the place. Is this in Brookdale? Tag the local paper." Inside, Mr. Laurent's assistant hurried to his side. "Sir, the media line is calling. They heard about an incident." Laurent's jaw set. "Tell them. I'll call back after service," but his tone lacked conviction. At the Rivers table, Eliza was calm but watchful. She caught her husband's eye and subtly nodded toward the entrance. Two figures had just walked in, not diners. One carried a camera, the other a microphone. Greg noticed them too. His face flushed crimson, his chest rising and falling faster. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The cameraman panned slowly, capturing the ornate gold sconces, the crystal glasses, the tightly pressed white tablecloths. And then, inevitably, stopping on Greg, Eliza leaned forward slightly, her voice low enough for only her husband to hear. "It's starting." Greg's mind scrambled for a way out, a defense, an excuse. But the problem with lies is that they collapse under the weight of truth, and the truth had just walked through the door. The reporter approached Mr. Laurent. "We're here to get a statement about a discrimination complaint that happened tonight. On camera, please." Gasps rippled across the room. Guests now abandoned pretense altogether, openly turning to watch. Greg froze, staring at the floor. He didn't hear the kitchen door swing open, didn't see the busboy approaching, carrying a tray that would knock the last piece of stability from under him, because on that tray wasn't food, it was Greg's last paycheck, printed and sealed in an envelope. Greg's pulse thudded in his ears as the busboy approached the counter, clutching a plain white envelope like it was a letter from a firing squad. "Ah," Mr. Laurent said. "This is for you," the busboy murmured, eyes flicking nervously toward the dining room. Greg frowned. "What is this?" The busboy hesitated, clearly not wanting to be the messenger. "He said you're done here." Then, without another word, he slipped back into the kitchen, leaving Greg staring at the envelope as if it might explode. A hush had fallen over the restaurant. Even the steady clink of silverware seemed to pause. Greg could feel eyes on him, strangers, regulars, even his co-workers watching, waiting for what would happen next. From across the room, Mr. Laurent's voice carried clearly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, standing tall in the center of the dining room. "Here at Lawrence, we have zero tolerance for discrimination. Tonight, one of my employees acted in a way that goes against everything we stand for. That is unacceptable. As of this moment, he is terminated. The words cut through Greg's chest like ice. Fired, just like that, in front of everyone. But then came a voice Greg recognized instantly, though he couldn't place it right away. That's him. Heads turned toward the entrance. A man in a navy blazer stood there, a middle-aged black man with a stern, steady gaze. He stepped forward, his phone already in hand. That's the same guy from the airport CAF last year. Greg's stomach dropped. No. The man tapped the screen, and suddenly, a video filled the quiet restaurant with ugly, familiar audio. On the shaky footage, Greg's face unmistakably leaned across the CAF counter, his mouth twisted in a sneer. His voice was tinny but clear enough. I don't serve people like you. Gasps rippled through the dining room. I saw this firsthand, the man told the diners, his voice calm but laced with disappointment. She was just trying to get a coffee before her flight. He humiliated her. I spoke up then, but no one listened. Maybe now, people will. Phones were already out, recording. Livestream chat notifications pinged from the devices outside on the sidewalk. OMG, he's done. So this isn't his first time? Get him out. Eliza, still seated at her table, watched Greg with steady eyes. She wasn't smirking or gloating, that wasn't who she was. Instead, there was a deep sadness in her expression, as though she was witnessing the final chapter of a story she'd heard too many times before. Greg's skin prickled with heat. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, to say the video was taken out of context, but every eye in the room told him it wouldn't matter. Dodoma. Lawrence stepped closer, his voice sharp but measured. You didn't just shame yourself tonight, Greg. You shamed this business. You shamed every person who works here with dignity. Now take your things and go. Greg's eyes darted desperately around the room, searching for even one sympathetic glance. But all he saw were cold, unforgiving stares and the bright, unblinking eyes of phone cameras capturing his downfall. His hands trembled as he snatched the envelope from the counter. The paper felt heavy, like it contained the weight of every bad decision he had ever made. Without another word, he turned and stormed toward the door, his footsteps echoing through the silence. The moment he stepped outside, a wall of Livestream viewers closed in, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mix of questions and accusations. Camera flashes popped. Someone yelled, "Say sorry." Another shouted, "You're going viral." Greg didn't stop. He pushed through the crowd, head down, as if speed could outrun shame. Inside, Eliza turned to her husband, her voice soft, but certain. It's over, but Mr. Lawrence, still watching Greg vanish into the night, shook his head slowly. No, something tells me it's not over yet. Partner is expanded version me tension Kafi build HUAHAI Greg K Bizardi step by step di Kai Guy HAI AU a crowd car reaction Zyada cinematic Barna Dia HAI.by. The time Greg reached the dimly lit parking lot, his hands were shaking so violently he could barely get his keys out of his pocket. The cool night air bit at his skin, but it couldn't wash away the heat of humiliation that clung to him. His phone buzzed. Once, twice. Then non-stop, a flood of notifications lighting up the screen. At first, he ignored it. He just wanted to get home, lock the door, and disappear. But when a particularly loud ping signaled a news alert, curiosity cracked through his panic. Breaking: local restaurant worker fired after racist outburst. Past incident caught on video. Greg's chest tightened. The thumbnail showed his face frozen mid-sneer from the old airport footage, side by side with a blurry still from tonight's confrontation. This is insane, he muttered, scrolling rapidly. Social media was on fire. Hashtags with his name were trending. People were sharing personal stories not just about tonight, but about other times he had crossed the line. He recognized some usernames. An old co-worker, a customer from years ago, even a neighbor from his old apartment building. He yelled at my little brother for playing music in the hallway. I was the black delivery guy he refused to tip. He called my friend a slur outside the grocery store last winter. Every post was like another nail sealing the coffin of his reputation. Back inside the restaurant, Eliza sat quietly, her fingers wrapped around a cooling coffee cup. She wasn't celebrating, she'd seen too many public takedowns to mistake them for true justice. Her husband leaned across the table. You think you'll learn anything from this? She shook her head slowly. People don't change because of humiliation. They change when they have to face the truth, really face it, and I'm not sure he's ready for that. From the other end of the room, Mr. Laurent approached. He looked tired now, the adrenaline of confrontation fading into the weight of reality. "Eliza," he said gently, "I just want you to know. I'm sorry. This should never have happened. You don't need to apologize for him," she replied, meeting his eyes. "But you do need to make sure this place is safe for everyone who walks through your door." He nodded solemnly. "You have my word." Outside, Greg finally slumped into the driver's seat of his battered sedan. He started the engine, but didn't put the car in gear. Instead, he stared at his own reflection in the dark glass of the restaurant window across the lot. That's when the second wave hit. His phone rang an unknown number. Normally, he would have ignored it, but something compelled him to answer. "Gregory Turner," a woman's voice asked. "Yeah, this is Detective Monroe with the city's Civil Rights Investigation Unit. We need to speak with you about a pending inquiry. Would you be available to come down to our office tomorrow morning?" Greg's stomach dropped. "What inquiry?" "I think you already know," she said. Her tone was calm but unyielding. "We'll explain everything in person. I strongly advise you to bring legal representation." The line went dead. Greg sat frozen, the hum of the engine the only sound. This wasn't just about a lost job anymore. This was about something much bigger, and he had no idea how deep it would go. Back in the dining room, Eliza's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it cautiously. "It was a short message. You did the right thing tonight. Don't be surprised if more people start coming forward." She stared at it, her mind racing. Who was M? And how did they know her number? Her husband noticed her expression. Something wrong? She slipped the phone into her bag, forcing a smile. No, just a feeling that this isn't over. That night, across the city, videos of Greg's past behavior were still spreading like wildfire. News anchors debated workplace racism. Activists organized a small rally outside Lawrence to thank the owner for taking a stand, and in a quiet office downtown, Detective Monroe slid a new file onto her desk. Inside were reports, statements, and surveillance stills, all connected to one name, Gregory Turner. She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her lips. "Let's see how many skeletons you've got, Mr. Turner." The following morning, the city courthouse looked like the epicenter of a breaking scandal. Reporters clustered at the steps, microphones raised, their voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. The heavy, grey clouds above made the building look even more imposing, like justice itself was looming over the day's events. A black sedan rolled to the curb, and the moment the door opened, Gregory Turner stepped out. Gone was the cocky smirk he wore at Lawrence. His eyes darted left and right, as though searching for a way to escape the wall of cameras closing in. "Greg, is it true you've been accused of racial harassment at 3 different jobs? Do you regret what happened to Eliza? Greg, do you think you'll ever work in this city again?" He kept walking, jaw tight, ignoring the questions. His lawyer, a pale, nervous-looking man in an expensive suit, shoved past the reporters, muttering no comment. As they pushed through the courthouse doors, inside the hearing room was small but tense, the kind of place where the air feels heavier with every passing second. Sitting at the opposite table was Detective Monroe, files stacked neatly in front of her. She looked calm, but her eyes told a different story. She was ready for this. When Greg sat down, Monroe slid a thick folder toward him. "Mr. Turner," she began evenly, "you've been named in 5 separate complaints of racial discrimination over the past 7 years. 2 involved verbal harassment. 1 involved an attempted physical altercation. And in each case, witnesses confirmed the events." Greg let out a sharp laugh. "You're dragging up old grudges to smear me." Monroe didn't flinch. She opened the folder, revealing photos, written testimonies, and most damning of all, a letter from Greg's former employer at the airport. It read, "Mr. Turner's behavior directly violated company anti-discrimination policy, resulting in multiple settlements and legal costs exceeding $40,000. His lawyer's head snapped toward him. "Greg, you didn't tell me about this?" Greg shifted in his chair. "It's exaggerated." "No," Monroe cut in. "It's documented." Across town, in a cozy coffee shop, Eliza sat with her husband. The TV above the counter played the live courthouse coverage, and even the baristas had paused to watch. The reporter's voice was steady, but every word felt like a hammer striking. Public opinion is shifting sharply against Gregory Turner as more witnesses step forward. Legal experts say if found guilty of civil harassment, he could face significant financial penalties and mandatory anti-discrimination training. Her husband glanced at her. It looks like he's finally going to face consequences. Eliza took a slow sip of coffee. Good, but this isn't just about him. It's about all the people who think what he did is normal. If nothing changes, there'll just be another Greg next month. Back in the courthouse, Monroe leaned forward, her tone low but firm. You have two options, Mr. Turner. You can fight this and we'll put every witness, every victim, every piece of evidence in front of the public. Or, she paused, letting the silence stretch. You can accept the settlement, agree to the penalties, and start making amends. Greg swallowed hard. Pride battled fear in his eyes. The thought of public humiliation was worse than the fine. His lawyer broke the silence. We'll take the deal. Monroe gave a curt nod. Wise choice. For once. Greg picked up the pen, his hand trembling as he signed. That small scratch of ink marked the collapse of his reputation. He pushed the paper back without looking at her. 2 weeks later, Lawrence Restaurant was unrecognizable. The once quiet place buzzed with customers, the tables filled with people who had seen the rally and wanted to support it. The local press called it a victory for dignity. Eliza was behind the counter, taking orders, when she spotted someone unexpected. Walking toward her Mr. Laurent himself, he carried a small envelope, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. This, he said, sliding it across the counter, is for you. Inside was a handwritten note and a check for $10,000. Eliza's mouth fell open. Mr. Laurent, I can't accept this. You can, he said firmly. And you will. This isn't charity. This is me admitting I was wrong and that you were right to stand up. For the first time in weeks, Eliza's eyes filled with tears. That night, she walked home under the glowing city lights. The streets were alive with noise, but inside, she felt a quiet peace. Greg's downfall wasn't the end of the story. There were still people out there fighting battles no one saw. But this was a step forward, and once the truth had been spoken, it could never be buried again.